Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast, The Worthy Wife. I'm so glad to have you here with me again this week. Uh, this has been a crazy, fun, and wonderful experience. For those of you who've been following along either on Facebook or maybe you've seen some of the stories that I've shared on my personal page, I am currently on a bit of a bike trip. It's my first solo bike trip, and it started off in Abbotsford, British Columbia. And I found myself heading down the number three. I didn't have an exact plan of how I was going to execute this trip or how far I was going to go. And so I left around 2 in the afternoon on Wednesday, um, the last Wednesday in June. So what would that have been, like the 25th, I think. And as I headed out, I had many delays along the way as I was preparing, realizing that some of the things that I had wanted to bring were not going to fit. They fit in the bags, but what I didn't realize was the one bag I had to use was on the back of my bike, and it had an extender, so that raised it up quite high. And the other bag that I was bringing was a backpack. And so when I got on my bike, or at least tried to get on my bike, the backpack and the bag on the tail of my bike were in conflict with one another. And so I quickly emptied one of my bags, the backpack, so that I was carrying now everything that I was possibly going to need, all the essentials in the bag that's on the tail of my bike. And I left with whatever I could manage in that one bag. And so off I went. And as I said, I zoomed through the mountains of British Columbia. By the time I got to Manning Park, which is only a couple hours away from our home, I ran into some rain. And I've always been warned about riding in the rain. And the main warning is don't, if you don't have to. And so when I got to Manning Park, it was around 5:30 in the evening. And I thought, well, I'll just stay and have dinner. I'm sure the rain will let up soon. And I had an idea that there was going to be rain on this trip, but it didn't look like it was going to be, more than just a few millimeters. And as I sat at Manning Park, had my dinner, and then waited another couple of hours for the rain to slow down, it was obvious that I had hit quite a rainstorm. And I was left with a decision to either stay in Manning Park overnight and see if they had a cabin for me, or if I was going to press on and get myself to the next town, which was Princeton. And so I chose the latter, and I headed out onto the highway with my bike, and the rain had let up quite a bit. And as I was riding, one of the semi trucks that was on the road just as I was coming out of the park had moved over, not only into the second lane, not only into the turning lane, but even as far as to go almost into the oncoming traffic lane, since there was no traffic coming, just to give me that much space, because there was so much water on the road that the splash coming off his truck, he knew, would be detrimental for my visor and for my ability to see. And I just thought, wow, like what a thoughtful and courageous driver to do that for me. But also, I mean, this is a pretty crazy and selfish thing that I'm doing, heading out and going on this bike trip in the rain. And I kind of stayed in that mindset for a while, feeling a lot of guilt and shame, and thinking about how I was causing others unnecessary suffering or struggle because they knew I would be out on the road. But as I rode, the rain lightened, and I moved quickly towards Princeton, taking on some of the sharpest turns and steepest downgrades that I've ever probably managed on my bike, and was having really the time of my life. And I realized how quickly that heaviness and that shame lifted as I was able to execute some of the turns and see the sun coming through the clouds behind me. And I thought it was like an encouragement for me to keep going and to not get lost in the really the lies that were keeping me from wanting to move forward. And I know I shared a little bit on one of the Facebook videos that I shared. If you're not in the Courageous Confidence for Christian Wives Facebook group, I would really encourage you to come on over and join. You'll see some of the videos from that road trip and recognize probably some of the some of the emotions and the sense of responsibility and things that I was carrying with me as I traveled. And I thought it reminded me a lot of how some of the ladies that I coach talk about feeling like there's space or that there's room for them on the road, in my case, but in their relationships. And they've shrunk so small, trying to not inconvenience anyone, wanting to make sure we don't bother somebody else or cause somebody else any discomfort, so that we can be good wives, good mothers, and thoughtful Christian women, so much so that we're willing to disappear completely and not show up for the life that God has really called us to. And I think that was one of the most amazing things for me as I headed into Princeton that night. And as I said, I'd taken some of the turns that I had imagined in my mind for over 2 years, picturing myself someday I'm going to ride that ride. And seeing how I was able to manage it, and how, while laying awake at night, imagining it, how different it was once I was there, to realize, oh, the sign says 30 kilometers an hour. Of course I can do this at 30 kilometers an hour. Here I was picturing in my mind, how am I going to do that at highway speed? It's too fast. It's too hard. And then all of a sudden I realized you don't have to go 50 and 70 and 100K. It's a marked speed zone for 30K. Why did I try to picture myself doing this faster or in a way that would, be impossible for me, instead of imagining how it would be possible for me to do? And so, as I said, I cruised into Princeton around 9:30 at night, fully expecting that I would find a room, only to find out that they had a lot of road construction, and there's a lot of different kinds of mining going on in that area. And so they had no rooms. And after I had sat there for about an hour, um, having a coffee and phoning around and calling all the different hotels and speaking to multiple people to try to find a place, maybe an Airbnb, anything. I couldn't find anything. And so I was told the next nearest place would be Karamias. And so I headed off on my bike to Karamias at about 10 o'clock at night. And as soon as I got to the outskirts of town, there was a machine working a mechanical arm down across my side of the highway that said there was road construction ahead, that they were grinding on the highway, and that I would have to wait for this mechanical arm to go up and for the oncoming traffic to finish coming through. And I thought, oh, this is great. Here's the second thing I was told that you should try to avoid on any highway trip, especially your first bike trip, is, anytime they've done the grinding or the grooved pavement, there's a lot of loose gravel and it can be incredibly dangerous. And so now it was nighttime, which was the third thing I was also told to try to avoid riding at night, because there's a lot of animals out on the road in British Columbia at nighttime, and, dusk to dawn, really. And now I was going to be riding at nighttime on grooved pavement. And I have to say, I was still a little bit damp from the hours before as I sat in Manning Park. And so I really didn't have too many choices except to maybe find, I don't know, a bus shack to hide out in and wait out the storm. And so I continued on my ride. And as the mechanical arm came up for me to go through, I continued on down the road. And because there was so much equipment and bright lights, I thought certainly there won't be any wildlife, at least. And so as I got through, and we waited multiple times to get through, I was off and able to get up to full speed, except for, of course, I was riding with my brights on, trying to be very extra careful that I didn't hit any animals that would want to be out at night. And so I had quite an interesting journey. And I think in the back of my mind, I was still picturing Carameus as it was, 10 or 20 years ago, which meant there, I didn't even remember ever having seen a hotel in Carameus. But as I entered the city limits, if you could call it that, I saw three hotels with open signs and vacancy signs in all three of them. And it was 11:30 at night. And I thought, you give up those ideas of getting yourself to a Soyuz tonight, jump in and grab one of these three hotels, whichever one will actually come and open the door, because they don't wait in the office. They usually lock the door and you have to ring or phone, which is what I did. And I did eventually find a hotel that would take me, and I found a warm bed. And as I came in, the young man there had said, there's coffee, go ahead and open the fridge. There's apples, there's muffins, just help yourself and make yourself at home. And what an open, wonderful experience that was after such a interesting and eventful start. As I headed out the next day, I was going to go, as I said, through a Soyuz the next hour, and then up a very steep piece of highway that zigzags back and forth, heading out of a Soyuz. And it was really the second most concerning part of the road that I had been thinking about and really worrying about how I was going to make it up that hill. But I also remembered how the night before, how God had shown me that there was room enough for me on the road and that I could go as slow as I needed to be able to manage the curves. And I had managed fine. And so as I thought about it in the morning and began the ride, I remembered that experience and just believed that God would see me through as I took on this ride in the morning. And I think they call it the Anarchist, I think is what they call the hill. And so as I was leaving a Soyuz, I thought, well, Lord, here goes nothing. And I started off and found myself having to shift down at different points. There was a lot of hairpin type turns that I needed to slow down for. But thankfully, there wasn't anybody sitting right on my tail. And so I had the time that I needed. And I zoomed up the hill, back and forth, up until I came up to what was a widening of the road. And it was where I remembered from trips past that I was over the hardest part of that hill. And I thought, well, there's one more hairpin coming as I go down this mountainside at Rock Creek. And Lord willing, I'll make that one just fine, just the same way I did these today and the ones the night before, and that He will see me through. But, as I was going up that hill, that was the thought that kept coming back to mind, that there is room enough here for me. And I remember feeling that way in my relationships where I had squished myself so small and tried to disappear so much so that I would never be in the way or a problem to anybody else, that I started to feel like there wasn't enough room for me anymore. And when my eyes were open to that, when I started to realize that, I stepped into the fullness of the relationships that were available to me. And I realized how happy people were just to see me showing up again, like stepping outside of my quiet and withdrawn personality, and instead now stepping out into the light where I could be in communication and in relationship with others. And I realized as I was going up this hill and I was going back and forth on the Anarchist, what I realized was there was a second lane for the traffic that was going the direction I was going. And there was room enough there for me to be there. It was okay that I took up a whole lane. It wasn't an inconvenience. It wasn't that I should be ashamed that I needed space. I could take up the space that I needed. I could go as fast or as slow as I needed to, and it was okay. There was room for me here. And that just was such a great reminder to me, because often when I coach now with women who are going through much the same feelings that I had when I felt like I needed to disappear, for a myriad of reasons, right? We don't want to cost too much money. We don't want somebody to have to change their plans to accommodate us. We are so used to fitting into all the little nooks and crannies and trying not to be a bother to people that that we disappear. And I had forgotten what it felt like. And I had been coaching women on this and this idea and this thought. And I just wondered if what I experienced on the highway, if I could share with you in a practical sort of way what it means when we think there's not enough room here for us. And I thought, this is for relationships. There is room here for me. There's enough room for me to be here right now. I can show up. And if somebody needs to move over a little bit or hold back just a tiny bit so I can show up, that's okay, because this is the role God has asked me to play. Not to be stealing the show or, taking up more space, let's say, and attention than necessary, but we are all important and necessary in this world, in our relationships, where we work, where we serve, where we go to church. There is room enough for you. If this is what God has called you to, there is room here for you. And I hope you feel that way within this community as well. If you are a part of the Facebook community, it's completely free. If you're not there yet, I hope you come join us. I know we have wives, we have recovering wives, as I've said before. I love that. One of my clients had said that. She said, "I'm not a wife, I'm a recovering wife." I thought that's such a perfect way to describe a woman who's gone through a marriage and is either, she might still be married, she may be divorced, right? Whatever the case is, there is room enough for you there. And I want to share with you and for you to be there. And so maybe we'll have to change that name. Courageous Confidence for Christian Women, that we would see there's room enough for me in your child's life, in your husband's life, if you're married, in your parents' life, if they're still with us. There's room enough for you. Maybe in a child's life where they've blocked you and you feel so disengaged and distant from them. There is room enough for you, for your prayers, for your love, for your concerns, for your letters, your emails, like to just keep showing up in the way that God has called you to show up. And that takes some time figuring it out, what is going to be the best way for me to do this? What is God really asking me to do? And sometimes if we can't show up for our own kids because they won't let us in, there is another adult child somewhere in this world who you can connect with, right? Somebody that you're going to meet at church, the guy who bags your groceries, if you still have anybody who bags your groceries, maybe the guy at Costco who boxes your groceries, where you will get to be that person for them, showing up, taking up space, the space that God created for you to take and to possess. Possessing the land is what it makes me think of, is show up and be in that space. You're more than just a placeholder. And sometimes I wondered if I was even a placeholder. Like I was so trying to disappear because of my lack of confidence, because my lack of belief that God had good things in mind for me, that I really struggled just to be present. And so if this is touching you in some way, if this is pulling a heartstring for you or causing you to think more about who it is God's calling you to be, I pray that you will step into that role. I know last week I talked about being the matriarch. Whoever it is that you are in your family, are you willing to be her and take up the space that God has created for you and that he has created you for? Okay. I'm fairly emotional, probably it's probably appropriate. I trust that the Lord will bless you, that He will use this podcast, that He will reach through YouTube out to you, that you will know that there is a place that you can go, that you belong, and that people are waiting for you to show up. You're welcome to join us in the Facebook community, Courageous Confidence for Christian Wives. You can always reach out to me. Anyway, I'll leave some notes in the show notes. Look me up online. I am currently taking applications for those who want to work with me. And that application is just 2 or 3 questions just to see where you're at and to notice if you think that we would be a good fit or for us to discuss. But it always helps to start filling out some of those questions beforehand so that you can know more about what it would be like to work with myself. And I trust that the Lord will bless you and keep you. Thank you for your prayers. I have had just the most amazing, I haven't even been gone a week yet, and it has just blown my mind. It's been good for my kids. It's been good for my husband. It's good for everyone. When we start showing up for the life and the adventure that God has called us to, even if they're not really excited when you start. Okay. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now.